Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our courageous conversation for George Floyd. America, let's talk about George Floyd. My name is Dr. Mike Mitchell, and I serve as Vice President for Student Affairs and Dean of Students here at the University of South Alabama. I also serve as the chair for the University of South Alabama's Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and I also have the privilege of serving as the Vice President for the 100 Black Men of the Greater Mobile chapter. I will also introduce my co-moderator for today, Dr. Joelle Lewis-Billingsley.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Joelle Lewis-Billingsley, and I am an associate professor in the College of Education and Professional Studies, and I'm honored to participate in this community conversation.
The goal for today's courageous conversation is to spend some time creating a safe environment for dialogue of different perspectives on difficult topics in order to establish greater understanding and to hear the concerns of students, faculty, staff, and community, and to inform the university's initiatives. Because of the increased interest in today's program, we changed the format of today's Zoom from a traditional Zoom to a webinar Zoom. And right now, there are over 370 individuals signed into this webinar Zoom. This change in format was to accommodate the increased interest in today's Zoom, but it was also to ensure that we would have a quality experience by all of those who are in attendance today. And so again, we thank you for being a part of today's very, very important and courageous conversation. Today, I'd also like to spend just a moment talking about our ground rules for the next hour or so that we will spend together. Our first ground rule is that we'd like everyone to listen actively. Our second ground rule is, as we participate in submitting questions, we'd like for those questions to come from your own experience. The third ground rule is that we want you to challenge one another in your questions respectfully by asking those questions. Fourth, we'd like everyone in this virtual environment to participate fully as much as you can. Fifth, we'd like for you to respect confidentiality. And lastly, we are asking that everyone who's participating today participate respectfully in your communication when participating in the chat. Failure to do so will result in your removal from today's program. Today's Zoom will be recorded for possible viewing by those who cannot attend during today's scheduled time. Because the program was announced in a system-wide statement by the president, we do have increased interest in today's Zoom. And as I said, we are now approaching almost 400 people in today's Zoom. And again, we do appreciate your interest and your participation in today's program. At this point in today's program, I'd like to introduce Dr. John Friend, who's the director of the University Counseling and Testing Center, to talk about some very important information related to trauma and resources as a part of today's program. Dr. Friend?
Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. I appreciate it. It's great to be here with everybody today. Again, my name is Dr. John Friend. I'm a psychologist and the director of the University Counseling and Testing Center here at the University of South Alabama. I will most likely be talking in depth about trauma as the conversation unfolds. One thing, though, I want to make sure that everybody knows is that in this community conversation, we're going to view images and discuss topics that many will find disturbing. We acknowledge that police brutality, death, violence, and protests can be very emotionally challenging. And therefore, our center will have counselors available to talk with you after this conversation. What I'm suggesting is for you to email me at jfriend@southalabama.edu, and I'll put that in the chat conversation as well. If you would like to talk with a counselor after this conversation, please email me, and I will have a counselor send you a Zoom link so that you can chat with one of our wonderful counselors here at the Counseling Center.
Thank you, Dr. Friend. Next up is my co-host and co-moderator, Dr. Billingsley, with a presentation to frame today's conversation and give us some guidance around our conversation and why we've all gathered here today. Dr. Billingsley.
Thank you. As our nation and the world memorialized Mr. George Floyd today, we found it important for us to provide context for our conversation together. And as we begin to move in our progress as people who are engaging in this important dialogue, we wanted to make sure that we knew that this was not an isolated event. And so if you would just join with me in 1 minute of silence as we acknowledge the names, the faces of just a few of the lives that have this tragic thing in common with Mr. George Floyd. I thank you for joining me in that minute of silence. You know, as we continue to move into this conversation, I would like to encourage everyone to really embrace where you are as we are moving and as we're sort of chatting through our questions. How can we continue to be genuine in our expression of how we're feeling, and also thinking about what this means for us individually? And so I'm encouraged that all of you are here with us today to be able to talk and that we can continue this dialogue over time. But I want to encourage you to allow us to hear your thoughts and how you're feeling and what types of things, as we'll engage later in the conversation, that you feel we can do as a university community.
Thank you, Dr. Billingsley. At this time, we're going to move into the introduction of our panelists. And we have 4 very dynamic panelists, all from different backgrounds, but who have all come together today to share their experiences and share their knowledge to help bring us all together to move forward. And so I'd like to introduce our panelists today and then give them all just a moment to introduce themselves once I've given you their names and who they are. And so we'll start alphabetically with Chief Zeke All, who's the Chief of Police here at the University of South Alabama, Dr. Paul Frazier, the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer here at the University of South Alabama, Dr. John Friend, whom you saw earlier, our Director of the University and Counseling and Testing Center, and Ms. Cynthia Tucker, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. Thank you to all of our panelists for being here today, and we'll start with 1 minute openings by our panelists, and we'll start with our ladies first. Ms. Tucker.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here and delighted to hear that there are so many participants who are interested in this. I'm going to take my 1 minute just to raise the name of Breonna Taylor, who is another innocent American killed in her bed by police officers. She had no criminal record. She was a registered EMT in Louisville. Police officers executed a no-knock warrant, which is an extremely bad idea unless you're in pursuit of a violent felon. Her boyfriend thought people were breaking in. He fired shots. The police opened up with a fusillade of fire. She was killed in her bed, 8 shots. There was no video. So her death has not gotten the attention that I believe it should have, but I wanted to take a minute just to say the name, Breonna Taylor.
Thank you. Dr. Frazier.
Thank you. I appreciate this opportunity. Appreciate everyone joining us this afternoon. As Dr. Mitchell has said, I serve as the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer here at the University of South Alabama. I want to open with the statement that it is good to have conversation and dialogue and some discourse. But I'm gonna lead with this statement that if we're going to be truly commitment without commerce is counterfeit. And so if we're just going to continue to talk without action, all of our actions, all of our words will just be counterfeit.
Thank you, Dr. Frazier. Chief All.
Hello to everyone. I see we're approaching almost 450 participants in the group here, which I think is amazing. And I'm the Chief of Police, and I appreciate everyone being here. And I really, what I guess to get out of this for me, Mike, and others is to just listen. I want to hear what others have to say, and I guess also share what we do to prevent things like this from occurring. So hopefully it's a learning experience for all, but especially for USA Police and what we can do better.
Thank you, Chief. And lastly, Dr. Friend.
So thank you, Dr. Mitchell. Again, my name is Dr. John Friend. I'm the director of the University Counseling and Testing Center. We are responsible for providing counseling services to the entire USA student body. And I guess what I really want to do is spend the next minute just introducing my staff. The staff is the lifeblood of the Counseling Center. We've got a wonderful staff, and I know they're checking in, so if you could unmute and just say hi real quick. I just want to introduce everybody to our staff counselor, Ms. Shantae Jenkins. I don't know if she can.
They may not be able to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we have a wonderful staff, Ms. Shantae Jenkins, Ms. Valerie Jones, Dr. Brandon Browning, Dr. Chelsea Greer, and our amazing graduate student, Ms. April Berry, all of which are completely dedicated to our student body. And I'm happy to have them here with me today. Thank you.
Again, thank you to all of our panelists for being here today. To all of our participants, because we are in the webinar format, today's questions for our panelists are going to be submitted via the chat function. And so as we move throughout today's discussion, use your chat function to submit your questions to the panelists. And Dr. Billingsley is going to be going through those questions. She's going to be taking copious notes on those questions and pulling those questions to present to the panelists as you are submitting them. So she's going to be busy combing through your questions and getting them prepared for our panelists. So as you're getting your first sets of questions ready for our panelists, I'm going to start with our first one, and this can be for any of our panelists. What does the killing of George Floyd have to do with our university, and why is it important? And that's for any of our panelists.
I'll jump in. Your university educates young people. So we have many of whom are young people of color, some of whom have probably had unfortunate episodes with police in their lives. And if they haven't, they know many people who have. And so I think for the university's community, this event is up close and personal. And as Dr. Friend said earlier, it's traumatic for many of them. You know, the ubiquity of cell phone video is a double-edged sword. It has exposed much injustice, but it has also treated us to seeing it in a horrible way that we hadn't been able to before. And I think that is troubling, traumatic for many people, not just the young folk, but the old folk like me too, in the university community.
I'll piggyback on that as well. It's important to me because it's important to our students. We have had a number of students reach out to the counseling center and express to us a number of emotions with this and how traumatic it's been. And so they're the eyes and ears of our campus. And so if it's important to them, it's important to us at the counseling center.
You know, it's important to me because I look at the instances that are highlighted, and I think about so many more that weren't caught on video, and so many lives that we've lost. And I think about how it has affected our history as a people, how it has affected our future as we try to educate young people and we try to have them make sense of it and have them understand their role in making a difference. Their voice matters in making a difference. And so I think it helps us to understand that we need to create spaces for all individuals to share in making sustainable change.
You know, Dr. Friend, if you were to ask most of us the last time we saw a white person actually killed before our eyes, you know, many of us would struggle for an example. But unfortunately, if you ask us that same question about a Black person, the examples might be numerous. What's the psychological impact of seeing such violent acts repeatedly, particularly when those people look like you? And how do you move on? How do you manage that?
Thank you, Dr. Mitchell, for that question. And to preface that, I want to say that it's very difficult to me, for me as a white male, to put myself in the shoes of African Americans in this country. What I've done is try to listen to my African American colleagues in psychology. I listen to my African American clients that I work with. I listen to my African American wonderful counselors on the staff. And so what I'm about to say really is informed by all of that. Watching the senseless killing of George Floyd would likely be traumatic on multiple levels for African Americans. The event itself would likely be extremely traumatizing. But more importantly, police brutality against African Americans in the US is one part of a much larger and longer lasting experience of cultural trauma, a form of race-based stress. So these visual images of police brutality trigger the cultural trauma African American people have experienced for over a century. So essentially, racism is repetitive trauma, where people of color experience chronic stressors on a daily basis, which can include not only institutional racism, but also interpersonal microaggressions. What happens is African Americans end up engaging in extra processing demands to ensure their safety, which leads to significant amounts of stress and states of hypervigilance, arousal, and avoidance, which can lead to a numerous number of mental health issues, such as depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and substance abuse. It also takes a toll on physical health and can lead to a number of health problems as well. Essentially, the stress response, our fight, flight, or freeze system is on 24/7. And it also results in difficulty with memory, concentration, processing information, which is extremely detrimental for our students as they try to navigate higher education. So the impact is significant. But one of the things as a psychologist I want to really emphasize is that we should not pathologize the reactions and the emotions that are being felt right now by everybody, all of which are completely valid, normal, and warranted. What's important is to be able to have forums like this to be able to express our thoughts, our emotions, and process these emotions. If we don't do that, then many people are at risk for these mental health issues that I've talked about.
Dr. Billingsley, do we have a question from the attendees?
Yes, I'd like to pose a question from Marie. She says she's a medical student and she wants to know what she's supposed to do. Because her work is in the hospital or the office, doesn't matter if her patient is going to be murdered trying to jog or just get their prescription. She wants to know, she wants to fight, but it seems like there's no progress. What would you say to Marie, who wants to know, what am I supposed to do?
Dr. Bisley, was that question for anyone in particular?
Yes, anyone who'd like to, just give her some insight. She's in a field that is, where she's interacting with the public. She's saying here that she wants to know what are the types of things that she can do. She sees systemic racism within her own practice, and she wants to fight that. So what are some things that we can give Marie in terms of tools or help to be able to help her be able to fight that systemic racism where she is?
I think the first thing we have to do as an institution is create spaces where those things can be addressed and where her voice is not sequestered. If those issues are systemic, we have to have a top-down approach to address those issues. And those issues and those concerns have to filter down, whether it's department chairs, and in her case, whether it's the doctors, the nurses, or her nurse educators, so that she feels comfortable, one, going into the public to voice those concerns, two, without any repercussions on saying exactly how she feels about those issues.
Other thoughts?
would say there are short-term steps and long-term steps. And I think we've already talked about some of the short-term, but I would like to say to her, for heaven's sakes, don't get discouraged. That's what I'd like to say. You know, my mother is 93 years old. She's always been active in the little community I grew up in, Monroeville, Alabama. And at 93, she's seen some racism in her life. But she likes to remind me when I get discouraged that if we keep pushing forward, things will get better. She's also a historian. She taught history. So she knows a lot about Reconstruction. And she talks about the fact that in this country, progress is often followed by a backlash. And we may well be in that backlash period now, which is very upsetting. But don't get discouraged. And for heaven's sakes, go out and vote in November.
So as a university community, you know, what can we do to learn from what is occurring and act to be a part of the solution? Can we make an impact on this problem as a university community?
Mike, I'd like to address that in one way, that we are, like Paul said, taking active steps to make a difference. My goal, and I hope that the University Counseling and Testing Center takes the lead on this, is to continue to build a trauma-informed campus. And we've taken small steps towards that. We have a long way to go, but we have to develop awareness from students to actually all faculty and staff on what trauma actually is. And I'll just share one thing. When I worked in the schools, providing behavioral health in the public schools in Mobile, we would go in, and oftentimes the teachers and the staff would come to us and said, you know, this child has to have ADHD. This child is just a behavioral problem, right? And so we would speak with the child, talk with the child, talk with their caregivers. And ultimately what we found out is that the child had a complex trauma history. And that was driving the behaviors that that the teachers and the staff were seeing. And so I think it's very important for us to develop that awareness with everybody about some of the things that I talked about, the devastating impact that cultural trauma has on our students. So developing a trauma-informed campus, for me, would be a great first step.
Dr. Billingsley, questions from the attendees?
Yes, I think that I'd like to summarize a few points for Chief Zeke. We have a few questions that relate specifically to the university's police department. Will you speak to a couple of things around the training for our police on campus in terms of unconscious bias training, cultural competence? And then there's a comment here that Greg wants to know what types of things have been done, Chief, since the unarmed freshman that was killed in the 8 years ago, I think is what it states here. What are you doing to make sure something like that doesn't happen again? And then there's one other piece here, if we could sort of think about in terms of like, how do you handle misconducts? What has to happen for an officer to be, released? So I can remind you of those if you need to as we kind of progress.
Yeah, that's a lot. So let me, I guess, start with some questions or some answers that you didn't ask and tell you how we get to where we get. First, I guess, starting off, it starts with the selection of an officer. How do you select that officer? How do we get to the person being selected as a USA police officer? And we do an extensive background check, and which is very important. The other piece to that is, as part of that background check, we utilize the services of our psychological counseling here on campus, psychological center, with Dr. Kim Zlomke. And as they go through that process and they participate in that examination, if there are any red flags that that are identified by our own folks here at South Alabama, we don't hire. That is a no-go. So that person is excluded and eliminated. On top of that, what we've done recently is, I say recently, the past few years, we've identified folks from within our own system, those graduating from our criminal justice program. Those folks already have skin in the game. They are South, we are South, but they already know the expectations of what is expected at South Alabama. So after they go through all this process, and let's say they're selected, they have to go through 13 weeks of training at the police academy, and that's done in Selma, Alabama at the State Police Academy. So they go through that, and they are given bias-based training. They are given de-escalation training. They are given all these types of training, which are helpful in the job. But that's just a new recruit. When they exit the academy, it is strictly basic training academy. Once they arrive back after that initial training, they go through 13 more weeks, basically several months of field training, with an officer, a ride-along program with an officer to make sure that they are doing things correctly. And then after that, they're put out on the street. But still, they're a young officer. Therefore, that training is ongoing. I've been a police officer over 30 years, but it's important that training goes on, and that's through roll call training. So earlier this year, we had Dr. Frazier, Dr. Mitchell come and talk to the officers about, what does it mean if you're a minority student coming onto campus? What does that mean? What does that look like for you? What can we do to bridge the gaps with our community in the police department? And what we've learned is education is very important. Choosing the right person is important. Having a department that looks like your community is important. And so I'm going to throw out a few numbers there. Right now we have 29 positions available here at the University Police Department. And of those 29 positions, 13 are filled by traditionally or historically underrepresented populations. So it's a good number. It's not a perfect number, but it's better than it was when I got here 10 years ago. And we're proud of that. More so, when you look at that number, of those 29 positions, those who are my supervisors, 5 of those supervision positions are occupied by folks who are traditionally considered to be underrepresented, which is important. And our students recognize it, and I think our students see that. But the other number that I think is telling, and why I think we're successful in many ways, and we make mistakes, there's no doubt about it, we absolutely make mistakes. But of the 29 positions that we have, 17 of our officers have Bachelor of Arts or Bachelors of Science degrees. Many or most are from the University of South Alabama. So they've sat in the same classroom that our students are sitting in right now, and they understand the mindset and the perspectives of the student. 4 additional officers have their master's degree that work for our department, which again is very important to us because again, our officers rather have sat in that same chair as our students, and they understand what that student is going through. And additionally, 4 officers are in school now, achieving or sitting in the same class next to our students, trying to get their bachelor's degree, and 1 additional is trying to get his master's degree. So we think it's important that our students see us out and about, they see us in classroom, we're doing ongoing bias-based police training, We're doing roll call training. We invite Dr. Paul Frazier. We think de-escalation is key. When I first started over 30 years ago, it was, you want to hire that guy because he's a big guy. Well, no, I don't want to hire the guy that's because he's a big guy. I want to hire the person that has good communication skills because they can de-escalate a situation and avoid problems like happened in Minneapolis. And that's another, I'll talk about that in a second. That was terrible. It was wrong, poor training, and I could go on, which I will. But we believe that the educational component is important. The de-escalation training is important to the point that we started up crisis intervention training, CIT. It's a 40-hour class, and our officers have gone through it. And what it teaches is how do you de-escalate that situation? And it not only works it works in all situations. It was originally designated for addressing individuals with mental health. But our officers that have participated in this program, which is a majority, we have seen that you're able to de-escalate all situations, and it prevents negative situations with our campus community especially. So those are just a few things. I saw something pop up about body cameras that I want to throw in there right now. I can't tell you how important the body cameras are. I know we talked about cell phones, and I encourage people to record. Please record what we're doing because we're recording everything that we're doing. And if you have a problem, I need to know about it. Come to me, come talk to me, investigate all complaints, and we need to address those complaints immediately. Those officers that act unprofessional, those officers that do things that violate policy, procedure, or against the law, they got to go. We can't have that here. And so we want to be fair and we want to treat everyone equally. So I'll stop there. I've taken up a lot of time from others, but I'll be glad to answer any more questions or follow up on anything that was in the longer question that you asked.
I'll shift gears for just a second and go to Ms. Tucker. Ms. Tucker, in the age of social media, how are journalists and journalism finding ways to tell the stories of this movement that's happening right now and finding ways to really move this movement forward and make it productive?
Well, we've mentioned the ubiquity of cameras. And many journalists that I know get a video as quickly as they can. If any person wants to send them a video of police misconduct or any other kind of government corruption, if the person can, if the journalist can figure out that the video is legitimate, they use that. They might tweet it out. I've also noticed in the protest going on around the country, I have to tell you, I have been pleased to see how scrupulous journalists have been about portraying what's actually going on. There have been some provocateurs in the mix who are not out there advocating for social justice. Journalists have pointed that out, again, sometimes with the aid of citizens who have video. So I think that in that sense, social media have been used wisely and well.
Thanks to all of our attendees. We're getting a lot of questions in. Dr. Billingsley, more questions from the attendees.
Yes, this is really directed toward Dr. Frazier. If you could give some sense around individual and institutional levels of engagement at the university. There are some questions that relate specifically to teaching diversity, cultural competence, in terms of systemic inequality and helping students be able to learn more about unconscious bias and topics like that as they move into their professional careers or build on their current professional careers. What can you tell the audience and talk to the audience about individual engagement as well as university engagement around these particular issues around curriculum and moving into the professional setting?
You know, I think as we move into different settings, you know, I think one, our education doesn't just happen in the classroom. And so as we're talking about culturally responsive pedagogy, if we're talking about digging deep into the critical race theory, and we educate individuals on that. That education has to continue outside of the classroom. And that has to become part of our culture. That has to become a part of who we stand for as an institution. And so as those questions arise, or situations arise, we got to address them and be just in how we address them. And those instances have to be swift but just. But they have to be without inequities. And they have to address the dichotomies that exist between just and injustice. And because we see that all the time, and sometimes that stops individuals from reporting, that stops individuals from getting engaged, and then that whole fear of, once I say something, am I labeled as a troublemaker? And so we have to create those spaces where those things happen outside the classroom, and those are safe spaces where you have those discussions, but not just a discussion. We come out there with solutions, and we come out with plans of action once we gather.
You know, as I'm looking on the chat and seeing a lot of my non-Black colleagues and non-Black friends, you know, this question comes to mind. For the first time, I feel like a lot of major corporations, networks, and non-Black allies are coming out publicly in support of the Black Lives Matters movement. Why is it so important? And this is for any of our panelists today. Why is it so important for non-Black people to be visible and to be active in this movement?
I'll take a stab at it. Well, I think we all know the answer to that question, but may I be cynical for 15 seconds first? I've noticed all the corporations stepping forward. I wonder how long that will last. This is branding. I wonder whether they are willing to put in the hard work of making systemic change. But as for average individual whites who are really interested in not just supporting Black Lives Matter, that movement, but in pushing for change, real change, systemic change, I like to challenge people this way. I like to say, go someplace, be it a church, a party, or a club, where you are in the minority. Feel what Black professionals feel on a routine basis. Go to a place outside your comfort zone and see what that feels like. I don't think you get picked on or laughed at, but I think it is different when you sit in a room and you look around and you notice that most people don't look like you. So just on an individual basis, I often encourage people to start there.
Other panelists for that question? Dr. Billingsley, I know we've got plenty of questions from the attendees.
We do. And Dr. Friend, if you could sort of give us a general overview where there is a comment that relates specifically to how people are to deal with racism in these systemic issues that we see. How can they move individually and within their workplace? What are some strategies to help them be able to cope with what they're seeing? And what types of things can they do in their individual relationships? Thank you.
Great question. And I'll start off by emphasizing what I had said earlier, in that it's important to feel your feelings. Everybody should know that what they're feeling right now, all those emotions will most likely be intensified, will be really strong, but it's very important to be able to feel your emotions. and in fact, be able to label your emotions, either through self-talk or to other people. I'm feeling really angry right now. I'm feeling frustrated. I'm feeling very sad. I'm feeling very scared. That in and of itself is a coping strategy, right? So feeling your feelings is very important, right? The second thing is to actually know that your feelings are important. Your emotions are important. They have a message underneath it. Oftentimes, when we have these strong, painful emotions, a human's natural tendency is to push them away. I don't want to feel that. I don't want to deal with that. And oftentimes when we do that, we don't get that underlying message. And we end up behaving in ways that aren't really good for us long term. And so it's important to acknowledge that. So once you feel your feelings, ask yourself, how can I take that feeling and translate it into values-oriented action, like Dr. Fraser is saying. I'm angry right now. What do I want to do with that anger? What steps can I take to address why I'm angry? And when you engage in those values-oriented actions, a lot of your thoughts will tell you, no, you really shouldn't do that. No, you shouldn't speak up. Nobody will pay attention to you. And I would say it's more important to be influenced by those values that you have for yourself versus those thoughts that show up and try to convince you not to do that, right? It's also important for people to continue to reach out to their support system, friends, family. Let them know that they are not alone. Hopefully they'll let you know that you're not alone, and continue to connect with those supports. And focus on self-care. There's a time to process your emotions. There's a time to act, but there's also a time to take care of yourself, doing things that are important to you, doing things that you enjoy. Sometimes our self-care is put to the side, and it's okay for the short term, but for the long term, we just can't sustain our lives without a little bit of self-care. So those are some basic strategies. Now, a lot of people don't have a good support system. A lot of people are really overwhelmed right now and not functioning well. And that's where we come in. It's a sign of empowerment to reach out for help. And so that's where the counseling center is. We are focused on being supportive to our students and providing the service that they need. And here at the counseling center, what we focus on is really culturally competent counseling. And within that, just connecting with our students of color, right? So I've asked many students at the end of our work together, what was the most important thing that you took away from counseling? Nobody ever says it was this cognitive strategy or it was this breathing technique that you taught me. It was more like I felt heard. We talked about what I wanted to talk about. And I felt safe coming in here. And that's what counseling support should be about. Listening, trying to understand. And so I encourage all students, if they're struggling, if they need some support, to reach out to us. We're here.
Thanks, Dr. Friend. Dr. Billingsley, the questions are still pouring in. Do we have another one for our panelists as we begin to start thinking about wrapping up today's hour-long conversation?
Well, I believe there's a general question around over-policing in Black communities that several panelists may be able to speak about. The comment was around, do you think that there's over-policing in our community as it relates to in Black communities? And what types of things are we doing on campus to specific types of training to be able to handle different situations, like Chief said, in terms of de-escalating and different bias training. There were some specifics that I think some of the participants wanted to know in terms of what types of training police are engaged in on campus. Two-part question.
Okay. I guess I can start with the training programs and you know, the training, the bias-based training, the de-escalation. These are annual things that our officers are participating in, inviting in guest speakers, things like that, so our officers can get more informed, better training on these topics. The other thing that has helped us, I think, move forward in a lot of issues in addressing our deficiencies has been accreditation. We're one of about 10% of the departments in the United States are accredited. They've not achieved that accreditation. And I'm thankful that we have a president and my boss, who's John Smith, who are committed to providing the funding so that we could achieve that accreditation, so that we're having those policies and procedures, those professional policies and procedures that hold us accountable and give our officers a guide on how to respond to things when they look different, you know, to us. So I think it's important for us to have that, and I think that accreditation is good. And I saw that one part of that question came in about the 8 policies that can reduce negative interactions with your community. Came in from someone, and I know Candace Selwyn and I talked about it yesterday. When I look through the 8 policies, I'm happy to say that while we might not have a policy for every individual of those 8 things that are recommended, what we do have is pieces of each of those policies within our broader policies. So I think that's why we're successful. Use of force is very rare on our campus, and I think that's because of our training, and I think that's why we've been successful here lately. But also we get invited to participate in functions. We participate in the Cannon Dozier project with Alpha Phi Alpha. We've met with Collegiate 100. But it's important for me to share that this is not just a conversation we should be having during Courageous Conversations. This should be an ongoing conversation that we should be having through, you know, things that we already do: pancakes with the popo, pizza with police, coffee with a cop, lunch with the chief. If you call us and you want us to come meet with you, your organization, we will be there. Anytime we do it now, and we'll continue to do that. But I think what I'm hearing in some of the questions that I'm reading that are coming in that probably won't make it in the time that we have is that we need to go out and we need to be seeking out our students and starting this conversation as opposed to waiting for them to come to us. So I guess that's our notice to our students right there on this Courageous Conversation. Get ready in the fall. We're gonna come to you and let's talk. We want you to feel comfortable with us for sure.
Could I add a couple of quick comments on the subject of over-policing? The first thing I want to say is, obviously, minority communities are over-policed. We all know that. I have been writing disparagingly about the so-called war on drugs for 20 years. But I would also like to encourage the attendees to think about when we vote, we think about the major offices, we think about the presidency, Senate races, Congress. Local races are so very important in terms of the criminal justice system. Elections for the prosecutor. Prosecutors have so much influence. They can decide whether a Black man gets charged while a white man does not get charged for the exact same crime. We need to think about local judicial races. So I would urge the attendees to think about those. The other thing I'd like to remind everybody is the University of South Alabama offers a criminal justice major. Many of our students will go out and join law enforcement offices. I have a joint appointment in communication and political science. I actually taught a criminal justice class here. We had great discussions around police ethics and police behavior. So I think just in classwork, there is a lot that the university can do to encourage ethical behavior by our students who are going to go out and become law enforcement agents.
Thank you. Paul, there has been a number of questions that have been asked about the administration and about the strategic plan around diversity and about the commitment to diversity and the commitment to increasing the diversity of faculty. Can you talk a little bit about the plan and what that looks like for you as the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer here at South Alabama?
Yes, thanks, Dr. Mitchell. First of all, I want to say I've seen a lot of the questions about, is this the only time that we will have this discussion? Well, we plan to continue these discussions throughout the fall, have a series on difficult dialogue, difficult conversations. You know, I think you asked about safe spaces. That'll be a safe space, but we encourage you to participate, but also have some solutions once you do participate. The second part of that, we will have some diversity training that will be online. It will be available to students and to faculty when we start in the fall. It'll probably be mid-fall, but those things will be available online so that you can have some continuous interaction and training. You know, I think, and one of the answers is, you know, Chief was right, is we have to meet people where they're at. And part of the problem is we don't provide them with tools to engage, and then we racialize everything and you make people choose a side. You know, if you have an issue and the only tool you have is a hammer, then every issue is a nail and you want to hammer it. And that's the only tool you have. So we have to adequately, and I emphasize adequately, make training available for all races, for all people, because it's not just this instance. Our job is to create systemic change and sustainable change, not just for this campus, but for our communities that we live in, and for these young people that are going to be those change agents for many years to come.
And so we've reached the end of a very productive hour, and we wanted to end today's courageous conversation by giving all of our attendees a way to give us some chances to follow up and improve and continue this conversation. So attendees, I want to ask you to do something in the chat for us as we wrap up. I want you to in the chat today, attendees, if you will submit in the chat, if you will submit ways that the institution can move this conversation around race forward. What are your suggestions for South Alabama in moving this conversation around race forward? We're going to be tracking these questions and using these questions as a diversity and inclusion committee and as an institution to continue this conversation and to move this conversation forward. While you're doing that, our panelists are going to take about a minute each to do the following. They're going to talk about what you can do as attendees today to help. What can you do as individuals to help? Because, you know, when you're watching everything that's happening right now, sometimes you can feel helpless and you can feel like there's nothing you can do. But our panelists today are going to do that, or they're going to talk about something that you can do now to help solve the problem. And so panelists, if you'll take just a few moments to do that while our participants are listing some things that South Alabama can do to help move the conversation on race forward right here in Mobile, Alabama. And we'll start with Paul Frazier.
Thanks, Mike. You know, I as part of this, as we were talking about what this would look like, we talked about it being a courageous conversation. And I think if we're going to be courageous about it, I think we need to speak truth to power. One of the reasons I came here to South was that I just felt at home. Immediately when I got here, it felt like family. and different organizations just brought me in. The 100 brought me in. My fraternity members brought me in. The campus brought me in. But in my family, if we feel like someone is wrong, we speak up about it. And we feel like there's injustice, we say something about it. We don't just say, oh, it's going to be all right. That's not how you handle things as a family. And sometimes as a family, we have to fight through things. Not necessarily with our fists, but if there are wrongs and there are injustices and there are disparities, we got to say something about it. And if you are sitting on the sidelines, muted, you are just as complacent, and you're really agreeing to whatever is going on.
Thank you, sir. Chief Hall?
Yeah, I think Dr. Frazier is 100% correct. I think speak up. We need to know about it. If you see something that's going on that looks sideways, like happened in Minneapolis, someone needs to know. Come to my office. My door is always open. I want to hear about it. We want to investigate it, and we want to remove the person who is, breaking the law or violating someone's rights. We need to know about it. So please communicate with us. I think it's important. And I think everyone needs to know what happened in Minneapolis was wrong. We recognize that, and I want you guys to know that we recognize that as well. It violated training, violated policy, procedure, and that's why it's important to speak up. We want to know about it.
And when something doesn't happen at that level, you go to the next level.
Absolutely.
Dr. Friend?
Thanks, Dr. Mitchell. I've taken away several things, and one of the most important things today that I took away was the importance of listening, and particularly listening to our students. And so recently we've developed the JAG Student Support Network, made up of several students who have mental health training that are kind of our eyes and ears on campus. Our mission is for them to let us know how we can best serve our students. I would encourage everybody that's participating, all attendees, please email me, jfriend@southalabama.edu, if you have suggestions on how we can better serve the students and the community in the area of mental health and wellness. For us at the Counseling Center, it's going to be important for us to not only provide quality services to our students, but also do a lot of work outside of the Counseling Center. This is everybody's responsibility. And so continuing to build collaborative efforts with other departments, other campus entities are going to be important for us, taking action steps to educate faculty and staff on some of the things that I talked about. Trauma-informed campus is one of those things. So I'm encouraged and commit to actually doing those action steps that we talked about. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Friend. And when you've got a Pulitzer Prize winner, I don't think there's any better way to end than with her comments.
Well, you've heard some of my suggestions already. I talked about getting outside your comfort zone. Yes, we are stuck social distancing at the moment, but with any luck, we won't be forever. Dr. Friend talked about self-care, which I think is important. If you're feeling discouraged, don't think you have to do anything radical at the moment, but take the long view. There are steps you can take. But the other thing I'd like to say is somebody wrote in the chat, silence is complicity. I'd like to emphasize that because all of us have a responsibility to speak up. I'm not even necessarily talking about speaking truth to power, although that is clearly important. But sometimes we are better able to do that than we are to speak truth to our family members or our friends. And I'm not just talking about your white friends who may think that some racist meme on Facebook is funny. I'm talking about all of us. If you're in a circle with a group of people who are making jokes about gay people or saying negative things about people who are Muslim or Jewish people, You should say something. Silence is complicity. Speak up.
Thank you. To all of our panelists today, to my very, very brilliant co-host, to the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and to the subcommittee who has worked to put this event together. Thank you to all of the attendees who have taken an hour from your day to help make a difference in this community, both the university community and the greater Mobile community, to help try to move the needle forward. Thank you for starting here today with us, and thank you for committing to help us to continue this work. Today is a beginning, and we are grateful that you have committed to help us to continue this work. This courageous conversation will not be the last, and so we will continue this work here at South Alabama, and we hope that you will join us as we continue this work in helping to move this this topic of diversity and inclusion forward, and making this campus, making this city, making this state a better place, and in that, making this world a better place for all of us to live. Thank you for your time today, folks. And again, thanks to our panelists for being a part of this conversation. Have a wonderful day and evening and a wonderful weekend ahead.